memorandum delivered long after midnight, an order so sensitive that even senior royal aides were denied immediate access. Within hours, security staff inside Buckingham Palace were scrambling, phones were confiscated, and longtime employees suddenly found themselves under renewed scrutiny. King Charles III, already navigating a fragile reign, had reportedly decided that the palace could no longer afford another hidden threat from within. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What made the situation so unsettling was not merely the existence of the memorandum itself, but the extraordinary speed with which the palace moved once it was delivered. According to reports circulating among royal correspondents and former household staff, emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors inside Buckingham Palace before sunrise. Senior aides who normally operated with unrestricted access allegedly found themselves abruptly excluded from sensitive discussions, while royal protection officers were quietly instructed to begin reviewing internal clearance levels across multiple regions. Royal residences, it was the kind of internal disruption rarely seen inside the carefully controlled world of the monarchy, where stability and discretion have long been treated as sacred principles rather than optional virtues. And yet, insiders whisper that this sudden crackdown did not emerge out of nowhere. For weeks, there had reportedly been growing unease behind palace walls. Staff members allegedly noticed unusual security activity near private administrative offices, while long-serving courtiers began exchanging nervous conversations about confidential information appearing outside official channels. At first, many dismissed the concerns as exaggerated paranoia during an already difficult period for the crown. But according to various interpretations of recent palace events, King Charles had become increasingly frustrated by what some officials privately described as internal vulnerabilities threatening the institution from within. The tension only deepened as rumors spread across Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Kensington Palace. Veteran employees who had served through decades of royal turbulence reportedly found themselves stunned by the severity of the directive. By SAA, some insiders even compared the atmosphere to previous royal security controversies that shook public confidence in the monarchy years earlier. However, palace veterans insist this moment feels different. There is reportedly a colder, more unforgiving tone surrounding the latest measures, a sense that trust itself is now being re-evaluated at every level of royal service. Sources familiar with internal operations claim protection officers were specifically instructed to reassess who had access to confidential schedules, private correspondence, and sensitive family discussions. Phones were allegedly reviewed. Internal communications reportedly became more restricted. Even longtime staff members who once moved freely through royal residences are said to have noticed sudden procedural changes almost overnight. And while no public statement confirmed the true reason behind the heightened scrutiny, the secrecy surrounding the operation only intensified speculation that palace officials feared something far more damaging than an ordinary leak. What truly rattled many inside the royal household was King Charles's reported personal involvement in the decision-making process. The king, around, Anai emerged, Edie facing enormous personal and constitutional pressures during a fragile chapter of his reign, has long been viewed as someone deeply protective of the monarchy's image. But according to royal insiders, recent events may have convinced him that quiet loyalty within the institution could no longer be automatically assumed. That realization alone reportedly sent shockwaves through the palace hierarchy. As whispers continued spreading through royal corridors, morale among staff allegedly began to fracture. Some feared reputations could be destroyed overnight. Others reportedly worried that decades of trusted service would no longer shield them from suspicion. And perhaps most troubling of all, insiders claim nobody seemed entirely certain where the investigation would ultimately lead or who might become its next focus. But the real panic inside royal circles wasn't about the leaks already discovered it was about what investigators feared might still be hidden inside the institution itself. For years, palace officials projected an image of absolute control, yet behind the velvet curtains and ceremonial traditions, insiders now whisper that trusted systems may have quietly failed before the public ever noticed. And according to reports circulating through royal administrative circles, one particular incident forced King Charles to confront a terrifying possibility. The monarchy's greatest vulnerability may have been sitting inside the palace all along. As anxiety spread through Buckingham Palace following the midnight directive, a darker narrative reportedly began taking shape behind closed doors. What initially appeared to be a controlled security review was now evolving into something far more disturbing. According to palace insiders and royal commentators familiar with the atmosphere surrounding the king's inner circle, concerns had allegedly been building for months over confidential information reaching outside sources with alarming precision. Sensitive schedules, internal disagreements, private staffing decisions. Details that should have remained buried deep within royal administrative channels somehow found their way into media conversations with unnerving consistency. At first, many within the institution reportedly assumed the leaks were the product of routine indiscretion, an unfortunate but familiar consequence of modern royal life. But the DA officials looked, the more troubling the situation allegedly became. Various interpretations of internal discussions suggest investigators grew increasingly concerned that certain staff behaviors no longer reflected the rigid discipline traditionally expected inside royal households. And within an institution built almost entirely upon secrecy, loyalty, and controlled messaging, even the smallest fracture can rapidly evolve into a constitutional nightmare. Senior aides reportedly feared that the damage extended far beyond embarrassing headlines. According to sources familiar with palace operations, there was growing panic that repeated disclosures could slowly erode public confidence during one of the most delicate periods of Charles's reign. The monarchy had already been navigating health concerns, succession pressures, and ongoing public scrutiny surrounding royal divisions. The last thing palace officials needed was the perception that internal systems were no longer secure. Yet insiders whisper that exactly such fears were now dominating private conversations among the king's advisors. What made the atmosphere especially chilling was the reported expansion of the investigation. On itself, royal households allegedly began quietly reviewing employee histories, affiliations, and even personal associations with renewed intensity. Staff members who had once enjoyed unquestioned trust reportedly found themselves subjected to fresh scrutiny without warning. Longtime palace veterans, some of whom had served through multiple royal generations, were said to be deeply unsettled by the sudden culture shift overtaking the institution. For decades, discretion had been understood rather than enforced. Now, according to insiders, that unspoken trust was beginning to disappear. At the center of the growing controversy were discussions surrounding digital monitoring and internal communications. Reports suggest senior officials debated whether stricter oversight of electronic correspondence, messaging platforms, and private staff interactions had become necessary to contain future leaks. Though no public confirmation ever emerged, whispers of enhanced surveillance reportedly spread quickly throughout royal residences, intensifying fears that nobody inside the institution was truly beyond suspicion anymore. The emotional toll inside palace walls allegedly became impossible to ignore. Veteran courtiers reportedly resented what they viewed as a corrosive atmosphere of paranoia slowly infecting royal service. Some insiders even drew comparisons to earlier scandals that once threatened the monarchy from within moments in royal history where insiders, not outsiders, caused the deepest institutional wounds. Those memories, long buried beneath ceremony and tradition, suddenly felt dangerously relevant again. And through it all, King Charles reportedly remained increasingly determined to regain control before the crisis spiraled any further. According to various interpretations from royal observers, the king had become acutely aware that the monarchy's strength has never depended solely on crowns, palaces, or public appearances. Its true survival rests on trust within the institution itself. Once that trust begins to fracture, the consequences can spread faster than any public scandal ever could. However, the crisis deepened when attention reportedly shifted toward individuals who had once been considered completely untouchable within royal service. Some had served the crown for decades. Others had survived multiple reigns, funerals, coronations, and royal see. Rises without ever attracting attention. But now, according to insiders, even the most trusted palace employees were being quietly re-evaluated under a chilling new standard ordered from the very top. What made the situation so emotionally charged was the sheer scale of uncertainty spreading through the royal household. For generations, palace service had operated on an unspoken covenant of loyalty. Men and women devoted entire lifetimes to protecting the institution, often sacrificing privacy, recognition, and personal ambition in exchange for the honor of serving the crown. Many believed that decades of faithful service guaranteed a level of trust that could never truly be questioned. But according to reports emerging from inside royal administrative circles, that assumption suddenly began collapsing under the weight of the king's new security measures. Long-serving staff members were allegedly subjected to enhanced background reviews unlike anything seen in recent years. Palace insiders claim old records were revisited, affiliations quietly re-examined, and layers of personal history once considered irrelevant suddenly brought back under scrutiny. Even individuals who had worked managed through the final years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign reportedly found themselves caught inside the expanding review process. And within the palace, where reputation often means everything, the psychological impact was immediate. According to various interpretations from royal observers, access credentials and internal permissions also became a central focus of concern. Certain employees allegedly discovered that long-held privileges had quietly changed without explanation. Entry access to sensitive corridors, private offices, and confidential meeting areas was reportedly tightened almost overnight. Some insiders described the atmosphere as deeply unsettling, not because anyone openly accused staff members of wrongdoing, but because the silence surrounding the investigations created an even greater sense of fear. Nobody knew exactly what officials were searching for, or who might eventually fall under suspicion next. The emotional divide between older staff and younger aides reportedly became impossible to ignore. Veteran palace employees, many of whom had spent decades protecting royal secrets without public recognition, allegedly viewed the new measures as a painful erosion of trust. But younger aides faced an entirely different fear. According to insiders, many worried that even minor professional missteps or personal associations could suddenly become career-ending liabilities inside an institution now consumed by internal caution. Conversations reportedly grew quieter inside staff quarters. Relationships became strained. Ordinary interactions began carrying an undercurrent of suspicion that had not existed before. At the same time, security officials were said to be tightening movement around sensitive royal areas with unprecedented seriousness. Protection teams allegedly increased oversight surrounding private meetings, confidential documents, and restricted communications between households. And while palace leadership never publicly acknowledged the full extent of these internal changes, insiders whisper that the message from the top had become unmistakably clear. The era of automatic trust was over. Behind the scenes, King Charles reportedly remained determined to restore what advisors privately described as discipline within the institution. According to royal commentators familiar with the pressures surrounding the monarch, Charles viewed the growing instability not simply as a staffing issue, but as a direct threat to the crown's long-term credibility. At a moment when public scrutiny surrounding the monarchy remained relentless, any perception of internal weakness carried potentially devastating consequences. Yet beneath the procedural crackdowns and expanding reviews, something even heavier appeared to be driving the king's urgency. Because according to palace insiders, these tightening controls were not motivated solely by fear of leaks or breaches. They were also shaped by a monarchy already carrying enormous emotional strain. Behind closed doors, a strain that was becoming harder to conceal with each passing week. Yet the tightening controls were not only about security, they were also about protecting a monarchy already struggling under extraordinary personal pressure. The timing could hardly have been worse. As King Charles continues facing intense personal and public strain, the palace now finds itself confronting another destabilizing challenge from within. And insiders claim the king has grown increasingly intolerant of anything that threatens the fragile stability of his reign. Behind the ceremonial appearances and managed royal schedules, reports suggest an exhausting reality has been unfolding inside Buckingham Palace for months. King Charles, already carrying the immense burden of leading the monarchy through one of its most delicate transitional eras in decades, was allegedly becoming increasingly frustrated by the constant cycle of controversy surrounding the institution. Every headline, every leak, every whisper of internal division reportedly added new pressure to a reign already defined by uncertainty from the very beginning. According to palace insiders, the emotional weight of recent events has been impossible to separate from the king's ongoing health concerns. While royal officials have remained measured in public statements, various interpretations from commentators close to the monarchy suggest Charles's condition has intensified the urgency surrounding palace operations. The crown, once viewed as an immovable symbol of continuity, now appears to be navigating a period of unusual vulnerability. And within that vulnerability, Even relatively small disruptions reportedly began feeling dangerously magnified. Sources familiar with royal administrative circles claim Charles Maillard had become deeply troubled by the growing perception that discipline inside the institution was beginning to weaken. Advisors allegedly warned that repeated internal controversies risked undermining public trust at the exact moment the monarchy could least afford instability. For generations, the strength of the royal family depended not merely on ceremony or tradition, but on the belief that the institution remained calm, organized, and firmly in control regardless of private turmoil. Now, according to insiders, preserving that image had become a matter of survival. Comparisons to Queen Elizabeth II's reign reportedly emerged frequently during private discussions among senior aides. The late Queen, often described as unwaveringly disciplined and emotionally controlled, maintained a court that operated with almost military precision during moments of national and personal crisis. Palace veterans allegedly began reflecting on how tightly information, protocol, and internal loyalty were managed under her leadership. And while Charles has long been viewed as more emotionally expressive and personally engaged than his mother, insiders whisper that recent events may have forced him to adopt a far harder approach than he ever originally intended. At the same time, Prince William and other senior royals were reportedly being quietly briefed on the growing concerns behind palace walls. According to various interpretations circulating within royal circles, discussions surrounding institutional stability had now expanded beyond routine operational matters. The issue was no longer simply about staff reviews or tightened procedures. It had become about safeguarding the monarchy's long-term credibility during a period of immense public scrutiny and generational transition. The emotional toll of that pressure reportedly left Charles feeling profoundly disappointed. Royal insiders claim the king had once hoped his reign would focus on modernization, environmental advocacy, and continuity after the historic passing of Queen Elizabeth II. Instead, much of his time has allegedly been consumed by crisis management, institutional tensions, and efforts to contain recurring controversies threatening the palace from within. Those close to the situation whisper that this latest security crackdown was not driven solely by anger, but by exhaustion, a growing realization that trust in the institution could no longer be taken for granted. And perhaps most troubling of all was the fear quietly emerging among palace officials, that the current crisis might only represent the beginning of a much larger problem. Because according to insiders, once suspicion enters the heart of an institution built entirely upon discretion and loyalty, it becomes almost impossible to fully contain. Every relationship begins to feel uncertain. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every mistake carries greater consequences than before. But while Charles focused on restoring order, another fear reportedly haunted palace officials behind closed doors: the possibility of future betrayals. Inside royal corridors, one phrase reportedly kept resurfacing during private discussions: "It cannot happen again." No one publicly clarified what it meant, but among courtiers and protection officials, the meaning was allegedly understood immediately, and the fear surrounding it was enough to trigger one of the most aggressive internal reviews in years. By this stage, according to palace insiders, the atmosphere inside the monarchy had shifted from concern to outright alarm. What began as a quiet security, its response was now evolving into a full institutional crackdown driven by one overwhelming objective: prevent another devastating royal embarrassment before it could erupt into public view. Senior figures within the household reportedly feared that even a single additional controversy could lead to a significant loss of trust, could severely weaken confidence in the monarchy during a period already overshadowed by uncertainty, illness, and relentless media scrutiny. And that fear, insiders claim, was no longer theoretical. Behind closed doors, royal leadership allegedly became consumed with the possibility that sensitive information could still be slipping beyond palace walls through channels they had not yet identified. According to various interpretations from administrative staff and royal observers, concerns over reputational damage had reached extraordinary levels. Every unexpected headline, every anonymous briefing, every suspicious leak reportedly deepened anxiety among those tasked with protecting the institution's fragile image. The monarchy has endured scandals before. That truth was reportedly repeated often during internal discussions. From fractured royal relationships to public betrayals that once dominated national headlines, palace veterans allegedly understood better than anyone how quickly trust can collapse once the public begins questioning the institution's credibility. And according to insiders, the greatest fear haunting senior officials was not simply the possibility of criticism, but the fear of appearing powerless to stop it. As pressure intensified, reports suggest communication policies inside royal residences quietly became far stricter. Staff members were allegedly reminded of confidentiality expectations with unusual urgency, while discussions surrounding media contact reportedly took on a far more severe tone than in previous years. Some insiders claim employees were subtly warned against informal conversations that could potentially expose internal operations, no matter how harmless they appeared. Others whispered that palace leadership had become deeply suspicious of how modern technology blurred the once clear boundaries between private service and public exposure. Rumors also began circulating regarding tighter restrictions surrounding personal devices within sensitive royal areas. Though never officially confirmed, various palace sources described an environment where phones, digital messaging, and unofficial communication channels were increasingly viewed as potential vulnerabilities rather than harmless conveniences. According to insiders, some staff members felt as though they were operating inside an institution slowly retreating into defensive survival mode. At the same time, senior royals were reportedly determined to avoid another crisis capable of damaging the crown's already delicate standing with the public. According to commentators familiar with royal operations, preserving institutional stability had now become the palace's central obsession. Public image management, once carefully balanced alongside tradition and ceremonial duty, allegedly evolved into a near-constant priority shaping decisions across multiple royal households. What made the situation especially emotionally charged was the growing realization that the monarchy's internal wounds were beginning to mirror some of the darkest moments from its past. Comparisons to earlier periods of fractured trust reportedly surfaced frequently among veteran courtiers, many of whom had witnessed firsthand how damaging internal conflict could become once secrecy failed. Those memories carried an unmistakable warning: royal crises rarely remain contained forever. And perhaps that was the most chilling aspect of all. Because according to insiders, palace leadership no longer seemed focused solely on repairing existing damage. They were preparing for the possibility of future betrayals that had not even happened yet. Suspicion was no longer directed at one specific incident. It had spread into the institution itself, reshaping relationships, routines, and trust at every level. And as new procedures quietly took effect behind the scenes, many inside the royal household reportedly realized that palace life might never return to the way it once was. The transformation did not arrive with public announcements or dramatic speeches. It came through silent protocol changes, revised security clearances, and private warnings delivered behind closed doors. By the time many staff members realized what was happening, the system around them had already changed. According to palace insiders, the monarchy's internal restructuring unfolded with calculated precision. There were no official declarations acknowledging the scale of the changes, no televised explanations, and no public attempt to reassure those working within royal service. Instead, the shift reportedly spread quietly through corridors, offices, and private residences in ways that felt almost impossible to track until its effects became undeniable. One by one, procedures changed. Permissions were tightened, expectations hardened, and within weeks, many employees allegedly found themselves operating inside an institution that no longer resembled the palace culture they had known for years. Reports suggest revised vetting procedures were gradually implemented across multiple royal households, extending far beyond Buckingham Palace itself. Staff connected to Clarence House, Kensington Palace, and other senior royal residences were allegedly informed of updated operational reviews designed to strengthen internal security and restore institutional discipline. According to various interpretations circulating among royal aides, these measures were intended not only to identify vulnerabilities, but to create a far stricter standard of accountability moving forward. At the center of the transformation was a growing emphasis on oversight. Palace insiders claimed staff conduct and internal communication and actions began receiving levels of scrutiny previously reserved only for the most sensitive areas of royal operations. Conversations that once unfolded casually among trusted colleagues reportedly became guarded and restrained. Employees allegedly grew increasingly cautious about what they shared, who they interacted with, and how their actions might be interpreted by superiors now operating under heightened pressure. The most unsettling aspect for many staff members, however, was the reported shift in expectations surrounding loyalty itself. According to insiders, loyalty was no longer viewed simply as a personal virtue quietly assumed within royal service. It had become an actively monitored expectation reinforced through procedure, policy, and constant awareness. Staff were allegedly reminded that discretion remained essential to protecting the monarchy during a period of exceptional vulnerability. And while such principles had always existed within royal culture, palace veterans claimed the tone surrounding them had become markedly colder. That emotional shift reportedly spread rapidly through the institution. Long-serving employees described an atmosphere increasingly defined by emotion rather than trust. Some insiders whispered that ordinary workplace warmth had begun disappearing beneath layers of procedural rigidity and institutional anxiety. Others quietly feared that decades of loyal service no longer guaranteed protection from scrutiny if future controversies emerged. Within the palace, where personal relationships once formed the foundation of effective service, the growing climate of suspicion allegedly changed daily interactions in profound ways. At the same time, royal residences were reportedly coordinating tighter operational standards in an effort to present a unified internal response. According to sources familiar with palace administration, senior officials believed fragmented systems and inconsistent oversight had contributed to the institution's vulnerabilities in the first place. The result was a far more centralized approach to discipline, security, and internal control designed to prevent future disruptions before they could threaten the monarchy again. And behind every decision reportedly stood King Charles himself, increasingly determined to place institutional stability above personal relationships. Royal commentators suggest the kin, G had reached a painful conclusion during this crisis. Preserving the crown required difficult sacrifices, even if those sacrifices strained long-standing loyalties within the palace hierarchy. According to insiders, Charles viewed the tightening measures not as temporary reactions, but as necessary corrections intended to protect the monarchy during one of the most uncertain chapters of its modern history. That realization is precisely why many within royal circles reportedly fear these changes may never fully disappear. What began as an internal response to growing instability now appears to have evolved into a permanent transformation of palace culture itself. But the greatest consequence of the king's decision may not be the investigations themselves, it may be the lasting culture of fear now spreading through the monarchy's inner circle. As the palace tightened its defenses, attention quietly shifted toward the future king waiting in the wings. Because according to royal observers, Prince William has been watching every development closely, and many believe these sweeping changes could shape the monarchy he eventually inherits. Behind the growing atmosphere of caution and institution, utilitarian discipline, insiders claim an even larger transformation has slowly been unfolding inside the House of Windsor. This was no longer simply about King Charles attempting to stabilize his reign during a period of extraordinary pressure. According to royal commentators and palace sources, the crackdown increasingly appeared connected to something far more significant: the preparation of a future monarchy under Prince William. For months, reports suggest William has remained deeply informed about the tightening security measures and operational changes spreading across royal households. While the Prince of Wales has carefully maintained public silence, various interpretations from those close to palace administration claim he strongly supports efforts to reinforce discipline within the institution. Unlike earlier generations of royals who often resisted structural change, William is reportedly viewed as someone far more willing to combine traditional monarchy with modern systems of control, efficiency, and accountability. And that generational shift is becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. According to insiders, younger members of the royal operation now find themselves hung between two very different eras of royal culture. On one side stands the old palace world built upon personal loyalty, long-standing relationships, and quiet understandings that often operated beyond formal procedure. On the other stands a rapidly emerging model reportedly shaped by William's future vision of the monarchy, one that places far greater emphasis on operational discipline, institutional protection, and tightly managed public trust. That tension has allegedly created deep divisions among younger aides working within royal households. Some reportedly believe the stricter environment is necessary to protect the monarchy from future crises in an age where leaks, digital exposure and public scrutiny can spiral out of control within hours. Others quietly fear that the institution is becoming colder, more procedural, and increasingly difficult to navigate emotionally. According to palace insiders, many younger staff members now feel they are serving inside a monarchy transitioning away from personal trust toward a far more guarded culture of oversight and caution. At the same time, efforts to modernize palace operations while preserving royal tradition have reportedly accelerated behind closed doors. Royal commentators suggest William has long understood that the monarchy's survival depends on adapting to a rapidly changing world without appearing to abandon its historical foundations. That balancing act, modernization without destabilization, may ultimately define his reign far more than any ceremonial title ever could. And throughout this evolving institutional shift, Princess Catherine has reportedly emerged as a crucial stabilizing influence behind the scenes. According to insiders, Kate's calm public image and disciplined approach to royal duty have become increasingly valuable during a period of growing uncertainty. Palace observers often describe her as someone capable of reinforcing continuity while easing tensions within the family and the wider institution. In many ways, commentators believe she represents exactly the kind of composed, controversy-free royal presence the crown desperately needs as it navigates this fragile chapter. What makes the current moment especially significant, however, is the realization that these internal changes may outlast King Charles's reign entirely. According to various interpretations from royal experts, the stricter systems now being implemented are not temporary emergency measures. They may instead represent the foundation of a new royal operating model designed for the future King William era, a monarchy increasingly built around control, discretion, and institutional resilience above all else. And perhaps that is why the palace appears so determined to enforce discipline now, before the next generation fully takes the throne. Because according to insiders, those closest to the crown understand that the monarchy can no longer rely solely on ceremony, symbolism, or public affection to survive modern pressures. It must also protect itself internally with relentless precision. And in the end, the palace may discover that protecting the monarchy requires far more than guarding its gates. It requires guarding the people within them. There were no televised declarations, no ceremonial announcements echoed across the palace courtyard. Yet behind closed doors, something fundamental appears to have shifted inside the House of Windsor. And according to those watching closely, King Charles may have quietly launched one of the most consequential internal crackdowns of the modern royal era. What began as a response to growing internal anxieties has now reportedly transformed the culture of the monarchy itself. According to palace insiders, the atmosphere across royal households no longer carries the same ease or familiarity that once defined life behind palace walls. Conversations have allegedly become more guarded, interactions more calculated. Silence itself now appears to carry meaning inside an institution increasingly shaped by caution and control. And for many longtime staff members, the emotional change has been impossible to ignore. At the center of it all stands King Charles, a monarch navigating one of the most fragile chapters in recent royal history while attempting to preserve the institution entrusted to him. Reports suggest the king has become deeply determined to shield the monarchy from anything capable of weakening public confidence during this uncertain era. Health pressures, institutional instability, family tensions, and relentless scrutiny have reportedly forced Charles into decisions far harsher than many once expected from him. Yet according to royal observers, the king may believe he no longer has the luxury of leading softly. That realization applies to have reshaped palace culture from the inside out. According to various interpretations from those close to royal operations, staff members now understand that loyalty is under constant evaluation in ways that feel unprecedented to many within the institution. Trust, once quietly assumed through years of faithful service, has allegedly become conditional upon absolute discretion and unwavering discipline. Palace insiders whisper that employees increasingly operate with the awareness that even small mistakes could carry enormous professional consequences during this new era of heightened sensitivity. And perhaps that is why some commentators believe the crown is entering a far more controlled and unforgiving chapter than at any point in recent decades. Comparisons have reportedly emerged between Charles's internal crackdown and the defensive measures adopted by previous monarchs during moments of institutional danger. Throughout royal history, periods of uncertainty have often forced the crown inward, prioritizing survival over sentiment and discipline over personal comfort. According to insiders, many within the palace now fear that exact transformation is unfolding again, a wine in real time. Yet despite the growing speculation, the public may never fully understand the scale of what has happened behind palace walls. The monarchy has always relied upon secrecy as much as ceremony. Sensitive conversations disappear into silence. Internal fears remain buried beneath protocol. And according to royal commentators, that silence itself may be the clearest indication of how seriously palace leadership views the current threat. Because institutions built upon centuries of tradition rarely alter their internal foundations unless they believe the stakes are extraordinarily high. At the same time, the future of the monarchy now appears increasingly tied to a delicate balancing act between tradition and institutional control. Royal observers suggest the House of Windsor is evolving into a more disciplined, tightly managed operation designed to survive an era where privacy has become almost impossible to protect. The crown, once sustained largely through mystique and public reverence, now faces a modern world driven by exposure, immediacy, and constant scrutiny. And according to insiders, palace officials understand that survival may depend not only on preserving unashed oil symbolism, but on controlling the institution from within more carefully than ever before. That is the paradox now hanging over Buckingham Palace. The monarchy remains one of the most visible institutions on earth, yet its survival increasingly depends on secrecy. It projects unity while privately battling distrust. It embodies continuity while internally transforming under enormous pressure. And through it all, King Charles reportedly continues pushing forward with the belief that protecting the crown demands difficult sacrifices few outside the palace will ever fully comprehend. Because within the House of Windsor, history has repeatedly shown that the gravest threats to the crown rarely arrive from outside the palace walls, they emerge quietly from within. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.